The word slipped out before Callum Voss could catch it. One moment he was standing in the sunlit executive conference room, balancing a tray of coffee and trying not to look nervous in front of the most powerful woman in the building. The next, he was reaching toward her trembling hand, saying softly and instinctively, "Careful, sweetheart. It's hot." Every voice around the polished table died. 12 senior executives froze. The legal director stopped mid-page. The assistant by the door looked as though she'd forgotten how to breathe. And Aurelia Sterling, the famously untouchable CEO who had once fired a manager for arriving 2 minutes late, slowly lifted her eyes to the single father standing beside her. Callum's face drained of color as he realized what he'd just called her. But instead of humiliating him, Aurelia leaned close enough that only he could hear, and whispered, "You finally said it. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unexpected ways love finds people who've almost stopped hoping, stay with this one." Callum had never meant to become part of Aurelia Sterling's life. He'd only meant to keep his job long enough to cover rent, buy groceries, and replace his 9-year-old daughter's broken glasses. For 6 years, his whole world had revolved around Maribel, a bright, watchful child who drew houses with yellow doors because she believed every safe place should look like sunlight lived inside it. Maribel's mother had left when she was 3, taking 2 suitcases, a brief apology, and leaving behind a silence Callum had never quite learned how to explain. Since then he'd worked warehouse shifts, delivered groceries, repaired office furniture, any job that let him pick her up from school before evening. He had no savings, no useful connections, and no room left for pride. What he had was patience, steady hands, and the stubborn belief that his daughter should never feel like a burden. His job at Sterling Meridian began as a 6-week maintenance contract. The company filled 42 floors of a glass tower overlooking the city, where sunlight through the huge windows made everything look cleaner, richer, more important than it really was. Callum fixed cabinet hinges, replaced damaged desk panels, hauled boxes between departments, and quietly repaired things everyone else had stopped noticing. He arrived early and left in time for afternoon pickup. He kept Maribel's latest drawing folded in his wallet, next to a grocery receipt and a photo of her missing front tooth. Most of the office barely knew his name, but they knew him as the man who never complained, who found lost keys, remembered which receptionist needed extra back support in her chair, and once spent his lunch break fixing a visiting employee's son's broken toy. Aurelia noticed him on his 4th day, though she pretended not to. She was 38, elegant without seeming fragile, so disciplined that people mistook her control for coldness. Business magazines called her relentless. Competitors called her impossible. Employees lowered their voices when she walked in. Under her leadership, the company had tripled in value, yet her private life had become a string of empty rooms, unread messages, and meals delivered to a penthouse she rarely reached before dark. She'd spent years building walls sturdy enough to keep disappointment out, only to realize the same walls kept tenderness from getting in. Their first real encounter came on a bright Tuesday when Aurelia's private elevator jammed between the 29th and 30th floors. Callum was working nearby when the emergency call went out. By the time the doors were forced open, she'd been trapped for 23 minutes. To everyone else, she looked composed, but Callum saw the whiteness around her lips, the way her fingers dug into her jacket sleeve. He didn't announce her fear. He simply crouched at the opening, spoke calmly, and guided her across the gap. When her heel caught, he steadied her without making her feel helpless. Then he handed her a bottle of water and said quietly that there was no shame in being frightened when the ground disappeared beneath you. No one had spoken to Aurelia like that in years. People usually rushed to tell her how strong she looked. Callum was the first to understand that strength doesn't erase fear. After that, their paths crossed more often, some meetings accidental, others arranged by Aurelia on excuses thin enough that even her assistant noticed. A sticking drawer needed attention, then a shelf, then a picture frame hung slightly crooked. Callum always came with his toolbox, fixed the problem, and left before the silence between them turned into something more personal. Still, small details connected them. Aurelia learned he packed 2 lunches every morning, one for himself, one for Maribel. Callum learned Aurelia only drank her coffee once it had gone nearly cold, because she always forgot about it while working. She learned he hummed when he concentrated, He learned she touched the silver ring on her right hand whenever she was anxious, though she'd never been married. One afternoon, Maribel's school closed unexpectedly after a burst pipe. Callum had no one to watch her, and missing a shift meant losing money he badly needed. With the building's supervisor's permission, he brought her in, setting her up near the maintenance station with colored pencils, a sandwich, and firm instructions not to wander. She lasted almost an hour before a loose sheet of paper skidded across the marble floor toward the executive corridor. She chased it and nearly collided with Aurelia. Callum arrived seconds later, certain his contract was about to end. Instead, he found Aurelia kneeling in her cream suit, while Maribel explained her drawing. That yellow doors were for people who needed to know they were welcome before they even knocked. Aurelia studied the picture a long moment, then asked if Maribel would draw one for her. It appeared in Aurelia's office the next morning, framed beside awards worth more than Callum earned in a year. Things shifted slowly after that. Aurelia started joining them for lunch in the courtyard behind the tower, always in daylight, always claiming she needed the air. The courtyard had young trees, stone benches, and food carts sending warm smells into the afternoon. Maribel talked enough for all three of them: school projects, neighborhood cats, her plan to become an architect who designed homes where no child would ever feel lonely. Aurelia listened with an attention that surprised Callum. Around Maribel, the CEO's sharp edges softened. She laughed without checking who was watching. She let mustard sit on her thumb. Once, wearing a paper crown Maribel had made her, she took an entire call with the finance department without removing it. Callum tried to ignore what was growing in him. Aurelia belonged to a world of private drivers and boardrooms and decisions that made the news. He belonged to overdue bills and discount grocery aisles. Worse, he couldn't risk letting Maribel grow attached to someone who might vanish. He'd already seen what abandonment did to a child. He wouldn't invite it back into their home wearing an expensive coat and a beautiful smile. Aurelia sensed his distance, but read it wrong. She assumed he saw her only as a powerful employer. She'd spent years surrounded by people chasing her money, her influence, her name. Callum asked for none of it. He tried to repay every dollar when she used a company assistance fund to replace Maribel's glasses. He accepted a permanent facilities position only after confirming he'd actually earned it. His refusal to take advantage should have reassured her. Instead, it unsettled her. It meant he could walk away needing nothing from her at all. The turning point came on a bright spring morning, pale sky, trees just beginning to bloom. Sterling Meridian was announcing a major acquisition. Investors filled the building, cameras waited in the lobby, and every executive felt the pressure. Short-staffed, Callum had been pulled in to help with catering, moving through the conference room with coffee and tea while the board discussed numbers big enough to change thousands of lives. Aurelia had barely slept. Her father, the company's founder, had suffered a medical emergency the night before. He was stable, but she'd spent the morning pretending not to be terrified. Her hand shook as she reached for her cup. Callum saw it. For one unguarded second, the boardroom disappeared, and all he saw was the woman from the courtyard who listened to Maribel's dreams, who pretended not to be lonely, who'd started looking at him like she was waiting for something he was too afraid to give. "Careful, sweetheart. It's hot," he said. The silence afterward felt endless. Callum wanted the floor to swallow him. He started to apologize, but Aurelia's expression stopped him. No anger in it, only pain, hope, and a tenderness so open it made him forget the room full of executives watching. She leaned in and whispered, "You finally said it." She'd heard the word as more than a slip. Weeks earlier, Maribel had teased Callum in the courtyard, telling him he only called people baby when he loved them enough to worry, when checking her for fever, buckling her bike helmet, waking her gently for school. Aurelia had laughed it off at the time, but she'd remembered. Callum stepped back, overwhelmed, and the meeting rolled on, because people in powerful rooms are trained to act as if hearts never interrupt business. But the moment followed him all day. He avoided the executive floor, fixed a cabinet that wasn't broken, reorganized tools that were already in order. By noon, he'd nearly convinced himself her whisper had been a joke, or a warning, or something he'd misread entirely. Then came a message asking him to meet her in the courtyard. Aurelia was waiting by their usual bench. Daylight showed what office shadows had hidden, the exhaustion under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, The vulnerability of a woman who decided she'd rather hear the truth than stay protected by uncertainty. She told him she didn't want an apology. She wanted honesty. She admitted she'd started listening for his footsteps outside her office. That Maribel's drawing was the first thing she saw each morning. That she'd spent years assuming success would eventually feel like love, only to learn that applause couldn't hold her when she was scared. Callum listened, hands clenched. Then he told her why he'd kept his distance. Maribel's mother leaving. The questions that never got answered. The nights his daughter waited at the window believing any passing car might bring her back. He admitted he could survive his own heartbreaking, but not watching Maribel lose someone else she trusted. Then he admitted the harder thing. He loved Aurelia. Not the company, not the wealth, not the woman printed in magazines. The one who wore paper crowns, forgot her coffee, and kept a child's drawing next to her greatest achievements. Aurelia didn't promise a perfect life. She promised something harder. That she wouldn't disappear when things got inconvenient. That she'd show up, explain herself, stay honest even when it hurt. She didn't ask for a grand declaration, just the chance to earn a place in their lives, slowly. Callum gave her that chance. The months that followed weren't a fairy tale. They were better because they were real. Aurelia made mistakes, missed a school recital when a meeting ran long, then showed up at Callum's apartment with flowers and an apology instead of an excuse. Callum wrestled with his pride whenever she paid for dinner or offered help. Maribel sometimes went quiet after good days, half afraid that happiness was just a warning that someone would leave again. Together they learned that love isn't proven through grand promises. It's proven by returning. Aurelia began leaving the office earlier, twice a week. She showed up to parent-teacher conferences and learned to braid Maribel's hair badly. Callum helped her visit her recovering father without turning every emotion into a business decision. Their two worlds didn't merge easily, but they merged honestly. The penthouse collected crayons, mismatched mugs, a small pair of sneakers by the door. Callum's apartment gained fresh flowers and a framed photo of 3 people laughing in the courtyard. Nearly a year after the conference room moment, Sterling Meridian held a daytime family celebration in that same courtyard. Employees brought their kids. Music played under the trees, long tables filled with food. Maribel stood beside a display board presenting her design for a community housing project, with yellow doors. Aurelia had quietly funded it, but insisted Maribel's name stay on the concept. As the afternoon sun warmed the glass tower, Callum found Aurelia watching Maribel from beneath a blooming tree. He handed her a coffee and warned her it was hot. This time, he paused on purpose before calling her baby. Aurelia smiled, eyes filling with tears. She knew the difference between a word that slips out and one that has finally found the courage to stay. Months later, Callum proposed in that same courtyard, Maribel holding the ring box. No cameras, no board members, no rehearsed speech. Just a small wooden plaque painted with a yellow door, and a promise that their home would always be a place where no one had to earn the right to be welcomed. If this story moved you, that's really all it set out to do. Years later, the framed drawing of the yellow door still hangs in Aurelia's office. Visitors assume it's a symbol of the company's community program. Aurelia knows better. It marks the moment she stopped living behind walls and let herself be known. Callum still worries over hot coffee, forgotten meals, and rainy sidewalks. Maribel still smiles every time he calls Aurelia baby, remembering the day one accidental word revealed a love 2 adults had been too afraid to name. And every morning, when the 3 of them step out into the daylight together, the yellow front door closes behind them, not as a barrier, but as a promise that they'll return.